A millionaire followed an elderly beggar who had stolen his wallet on the street. When the millionaire discovered what the beggar did with the money, he was shocked. The afternoon fell over the city center with that golden light that made everything slower, denser, as if time needed an extra effort to move forward. William walked along the busy sidewalk, lost in thoughts that led nowhere, as had been happening in recent years. His hands were in the pockets of his custom-made Italian suit. His leather shoes hit the concrete with a mechanical rhythm, and his eyes scanned the hurried faces around him without really seeing them. He had just left another empty meeting, where men and women talked about numbers that meant nothing beyond more numbers, and felt that familiar weight in his chest, that sensation that his entire life was made of expensive paper and fading ink. The cold seasonal wind touched his face, and he blinked slowly, trying to push away the fog that seemed to envelope everything around him. Another day, he thought, without understanding why it sounded so empty. That's when he felt it. A light touch, almost imperceptible, on the side of his jacket. William stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and a woman bumped into him, muttering something he didn't hear. His hand instinctively went to the inside pocket, where he always kept the leather wallet that had belonged to his father. His fingers found only the fabric lining, empty. His heart accelerated in a way that hadn't happened in years, as if someone had turned on a switch he thought was broken. He spun on his heels, eyes scanning the crowd with an urgency that made people step away. That's when he saw an elderly man with curved back, clothes that looked like they had been collected from garbage bins, holding something against his chest while moving too quickly for someone in that condition. William didn't need to think. "He took my wallet," he said aloud, and the certainty of it burned in his chest like old anger. He began walking faster, pushing people aside without excusing himself, not caring about the irritated looks or complaints left behind. The old man looked over his shoulder once, and William saw the thin face, the deep wrinkles, the eyes wide with panic. The beggar sped up, turning left onto a side street, and William followed without hesitation. His lungs began to burn, not from physical exhaustion, but from something he couldn't name. He thought about calling the police, about shouting for help, but his legs kept moving, as if he needed to do this alone, as if this was about much more than a wallet. The sound of his steps echoed too loudly in his own head, mixed with the heavy breathing of the man ahead. Why is he running so much? Thought William, and the question brought with it an uneasiness he hadn't expected. The beggar turned down another alley, and William almost lost his balance making the turn. His back hit the brick wall lightly, but he felt no pain, only the growing pressure in his chest, that feeling that something important was happening, and he didn't know what. The old man was coughing now, a hoarse and deep cough that seemed to tear pieces from inside him, but his feet didn't stop. He held his chest with one hand while the other pressed something against his body. William saw the gleam of brown leather between the dirty fingers. It was indeed his wallet. Anger rose like bile in his throat, hot and bitter. He had never been robbed in his life. He had never needed to run after anything. He had everything, bought everything, controlled everything, and now an old sick beggar was making him run through the streets as if he were nobody. "Stop!" shouted William, but his voice was lost in the traffic noise. They crossed a crowded avenue, cars honking and braking sharply. William heard drivers shouting, felt the heat of a bumper that passed inches from his leg, but didn't slow his pace. The beggar was only a few meters ahead now, and William could see the way he limped slightly, how his breath came out in desperate bursts. Something was wrong there. Something didn't fit. Thieves didn't run toward crowded places. Thieves didn't cough as if they were dying while fleeing. But William didn't want to think about that. He wanted his wallet back. He wanted to look into that man's eyes and see fear, see regret, see something that justified the feeling of emptiness that consumed him every day. "You won't escape," William said to himself, and his hands closed into fists. The beggar turned another corner, his legs visibly trembling now, and William gained ground. He was so close that he could hear the moans of pain between coughs, could see the sweat running down the man's neck, leaving dark marks on the collar of his torn shirt. The old man brought his hand to his chest again, and for a moment it seemed he would fall, but he leaned against the wall of a building and continued. William felt something strange moving inside of him, something between frustration and concern. That man clearly wasn't well. That man was hurting himself to escape, But why? For a wallet? There were cards in it, yes, money, yes, but nothing worth dying for. "What are you doing?" William murmured, not knowing if he was talking to himself or to the homeless man. They passed by a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread hit William's face, incongruous with the intensity of the moment. People sitting at tables looked through the window, seeing two men running as if their lives depended on it. A child pointed, and her mother pulled her close. William saw all this peripherally, but he couldn't stop. His feet had a will of their own now. The homeless man crossed another street more slowly this time, and William was just 3 meters away. He could reach him. He could grab him. He could end all of this. But something made him hesitate. Something in the way the man moved, as if each step cost him everything he had. "Just a little more," William heard the homeless man whisper to himself, and those words cut through the air like glass. The street opened into a wide avenue, and suddenly there was more light, more space, more air. The homeless man stopped for a fraction of a second, looking around as if searching for something, and William took advantage to gain more ground. He was 2 meters away now, 1.5 meters. He stretched out his arm, his fingers almost touching the man's shoulder, and then the homeless man saw him. Their eyes met for an instant, and William saw something there that made him stop. It wasn't fear, it wasn't guilt, it was pure desperation, unfiltered, defenseless. It was the look of someone fighting against something much bigger than both of them. The homeless man turned his face and ran again, faster this time, as if that look had given him strength he shouldn't have. "Wait!" William shouted, but even he no longer knew what he was asking for. They ran for 2 more blocks, and William felt his own legs beginning to protest. He didn't exercise, he didn't run. He spent his days sitting in offices and his dinners in expensive restaurants. His body wasn't prepared for this. But his mind was elsewhere, focused only on the man in front of him, that hunched and broken figure who shouldn't be able to move so fast. The homeless man coughed again, and this time it was different. It was more violent, deeper, and he had to stop, doubling over, his hands still on his chest. William slowed down, watching, waiting for the man to fall. But he didn't fall. He just breathed deeply 3 times, 4, 5, and then moved forward, more slowly now, but still moving. "You'll kill yourself," William said out loud, and the truth of it frightened him. Ahead, a building appeared. Enormous, made of concrete and glass, with a red cross painted on the facade. A hospital. William saw it even before the homeless man started running in that direction. He saw the parked ambulances, people going in and out, the constant movement of a place where lives were saved and lost every day. And he saw the homeless man accelerate toward it, as if it were the finish line of a race he couldn't lose. William frowned, confused, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Why would a thief run to a hospital? Why not to a dark alley, to a narrow street, to any place where he could hide? None of it made sense. "What are you doing?" William asked again, louder this time, but the homeless man didn't answer. The elderly man reached the main entrance of the hospital and, without looking back, went through the revolving doors and disappeared inside the building. William stopped on the sidewalk, his hands on his knees, breathing heavily. Sweat ran down his face, staining the collar of his expensive shirt. He looked up at the hospital windows, at the red cross that seemed to shine in the afternoon light. People passed by him, going in and coming out, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, others simply walking with that empty expression that comes from spending too much time in places like that. William straightened up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He could see through the glass doors, see the busy lobby, see people everywhere, but he couldn't see the homeless man. Why here? William thought, and the question echoed in his mind without answer. He took a step toward the entrance, then stopped. His legs were shaking slightly, not from fatigue, but from something he couldn't identify. It was indecision. It was confusion. It was the feeling that if he crossed those doors, something would change, something he couldn't undo. William looked at his hands, at his wrinkled suit, at his shoes that now had dirt marks from the run through the streets. He thought about the wallet, the money, the cards. He thought about how easy it would be to just leave, call the bank, solve everything with a few calls. But then he thought about the homeless man's face, that desperation he'd seen in his eyes, and something inside him refused to leave. He went into a hospital, William murmured to himself, trying to make sense of it. An ambulance arrived honking, and William stepped aside, watching the paramedics jump out and run to the back of the vehicle. They pulled out a stretcher, shouting instructions to each other, and ran into the hospital. William saw blood on one of the sheets and quickly looked away. He had never liked hospitals, had never liked the smell, the sounds, the memories they brought back. But there he was, standing at the entrance of one, chasing a homeless man who had stolen his wallet. The irony didn't escape him. He shook his head, almost laughing at himself. "What am I doing?" he asked out loud, and nobody answered. Another person walked past him, an elderly woman leaning on a cane, and she looked at him strangely, as if trying to understand why a man in a suit was standing there, sweaty and lost. William offered an awkward smile, and she moved on. He looked again at the hospital doors, at that threshold between the outside world and something he couldn't name. He could leave. He could simply turn his back and leave all this behind. The wallet was replaceable. The money was replaceable. Everything in his life was replaceable. But that feeling in his chest, that burning curiosity, that need to understand why a thief would run to a hospital, that wasn't replaceable. Why would a thief go in there of all places? William thought, and the question weighed more than any answer he could imagine. He stood there on the sidewalk while the sun continued to descend on the horizon, tinting the sky orange and pink. People kept entering and leaving the hospital, each carrying their own stories, their own pain, and William stood there, hesitating at the door, torn between the anger he thought he should feel and the curiosity he couldn't ignore. His right hand moved toward the pocket where his wallet usually was, found the emptiness again, and that was like a reminder. He had been robbed. That man owed him an explanation. That man owed him his property back. But when William looked at the hospital doors again, all he could think about was that violent cough, that hand on the chest, that desperation that didn't match a common thief. "What are you hiding?" William murmured. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he took the first step toward the entrance. The revolving doors swallowed William with a mechanical sigh, and suddenly he was inside. The air conditioning hit his sweaty face, making him shiver involuntarily. The lobby was huge, with high ceilings and fluorescent lights that made everything look paler, colder, more distant from reality. There were people everywhere, sitting in blue plastic chairs, walking hurriedly with clipboards, carrying bags and holding the hands of children who were crying softly. The smell hit him hard, that mixture of alcohol, disinfectant, and something sweet that William couldn't identify, but that made his stomach turn. He stopped just after the doors, his eyes scanning the environment urgently, looking for that hunched figure, those worn clothes, that man who had something that belonged to him. William took a deep breath, trying to calm the heart that was still racing from the run. "Where are you?" he thought, and his fists closed instinctively. That's when he heard it, a hoarse, broken voice coming from the service counter to his left. William turned his head abruptly and saw him. The homeless man was there, leaning over the high reception counter, talking to a nurse in a green uniform with her hair tied in a tight bun. He was still holding something against his chest, and even from a distance William could see that it was his hands that were violently shaking. The old man was breathing irregularly, his mouth opening and closing as if the air wasn't enough, and his free hand repeatedly went to his chest, pressing, rubbing, as if trying to relieve a pain that came from within. William took a step forward, then another, keeping himself partially hidden behind a wide pillar that supported the ceiling. He didn't know why he was hiding. He just knew he needed to see, needed to understand before acting. "What are you doing?" William murmured to himself, and his eyes couldn't look away from that scene. The nurse behind the counter leaned forward, her expression changing from neutral to concerned in a matter of seconds. She extended her hand as if to touch the beggar's arm, but he was speaking so fast, so desperately, that she just listened. William saw the man's lips move frantically, saw the tears already running down that thin and marked face, saw the way he clutched his chest again and had to lean on the counter to keep from falling. The nurse rose quickly from her chair, coming around the counter, and William could hear her voice cutting through the noise of the lobby. "Are you all right, sir? Do you need to sit down?" she asked, and there was genuine concern in her tone, that professional yet human concern of someone who saw suffering every day. William watched as the beggar violently shook his head, refusing the offer. He's sick, William thought, and the conclusion brought with it a twinge of something that might be guilt. The beggar picked something up from the counter, and William saw it clearly now. It was his wallet. The brown leather worn by time, stained with sweat and dirt. The old man opened it with fingers that trembled so much he nearly dropped it and began taking out money. Bills of all denominations crumpled, being placed on the counter one by one as the man spoke, and now William could hear stray words reaching him like shrapnel. "My granddaughter," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, she's all I have left." The nurse took the money but didn't count it, only looked at the beggar's face with that expression William recognized as pity. The old man continued talking, faster now, words stumbling over each other. "Her parents died in an accident 2 years ago. I only have her. She can't, please, she can't," he said. And then his voice disappeared into a sob that made his entire body shake. William felt something contract in his chest, something he hadn't felt for a long time. The nurse finally took the money and counted it quickly, her skilled fingers moving the bills with efficiency. William saw her expression change, saw the way she bit her lower lip, saw the small shake of her head that meant nothing good. She put the money back on the counter and leaned closer to the beggar, speaking softly, but William was close enough now to hear every word. "Sir, this amount isn't enough for the medication. The public hospital covers basic care, but this specific medicine, it's imported. It has to be paid for separately," she explained, and there was real sadness in her voice, as if she wished she could give a different answer. The beggar staggered as if he'd been punched, his hand flying to his chest again, and this time he groaned in pain. "No, please, there has to be a way. She'll die without it," he said, and each word seemed to cost him everything. William swallowed hard, his entire body tense. The nurse put her hand on the old man's shoulder, trying to calm him, but it was like trying to hold water in her hands. He was falling apart right there, in the middle of the hospital lobby, and William watched it all from his hiding place behind the pillar. He looked at the money on the counter, at the bills he recognized as his, at the wallet that was still in the beggar's hand. That was his money. That was his property. He had every right to march over there, confront the man, demand everything back, call security. But his feet wouldn't move. They were stuck to the floor as if the linoleum had turned to glue. He thought about how he had chased that man through the streets, the anger he had felt, the absolute certainty that he was right. But now, seeing this, hearing this, everything seemed different. He didn't steal for himself, William thought, and the revelation was too heavy. Another nurse approached, younger, with a tablet in her hand. She spoke quickly with the first one, and William saw both look at the beggar with that expression that healthcare professionals have when they need to give bad news. The first nurse turned to the old man and spoke slowly, clearly as if talking to someone who wasn't processing information well. "Sir, I'm going to take you to where your granddaughter is. She's in the pediatric intensive care unit. But I need you to understand, without the complete medication, the doctors are doing what they can, but it's limited," she said, and the beggar just nodded, already starting to walk, or rather limp toward the hallway she indicated. William stepped out from behind the pillar, following them at a distance, keeping enough space not to be noticed. "Why am I following?" he asked himself, but didn't stop. They walked down a long corridor, with walls painted in a light green that was probably meant to be calming, but only looked sickly under the fluorescent lights. There were signs indicating different wards, offices, laboratories. There were stretchers leaning against the walls, equipment covered with sheets, cleaning carts. The smell of hospital was stronger here, and William had to breathe through his mouth to avoid nausea. The homeless man walked leaning against the wall, leaving a trail of sweaty handprints on the plaster, and the nurse moved slowly beside him, ready to hold him if he fell. They turned left, then right, and William followed them like a shadow, keeping his distance, not fully understanding why he was doing this. He saw a sign above double doors, "Pediatric Intensive Care." There's a child involved in this, William thought, and something ice-cold ran down his spine. The double doors opened automatically, and the nurse guided the homeless man inside. William stopped before the doors, watching through the small windows of reinforced glass. He saw more nurses, doctors in white coats, equipment that blinked and beeped. He saw small beds with rails, and in some of them tiny forms covered with white sheets. Children. All children. William felt his stomach turn again, And this time it wasn't because of the smell. He had never liked seeing sick children. It made him remember things he preferred to forget. A coffin that was too small. A mother who was never the same again. He put his hand on the wall for support, breathing deeply. You don't need to be here, he thought, but his eyes remained glued to those windows. The nurse took the homeless man to a specific door, the third one in the internal corridor, and knocked lightly before opening it. William couldn't see what was inside from where he stood, but he saw the old man's reaction. He stumbled in, almost running, and William heard a muffled cry, a name he didn't understand, carrying so much pain that it made his heart tighten. The nurse stayed outside, talking with a doctor who had appeared from somewhere. A middle-aged woman with tied-back grey hair and deep circles under her eyes. They spoke quietly, but William silently opened the double doors and entered the ward, keeping close to the opposite wall, out of their line of sight. He could hear fragments now, isolated words forming a terrible puzzle. No response to basic treatments, needs the imported one is matter of hours. This child is dying, William thought, and the word echoed in his mind like a funeral bell. The doctor looked at the half-open door of the room where the homeless man was, and her face was the image of compassionate exhaustion. She ran her hand over her face, rubbing her eyes, and then entered the room. William took a few more steps, getting close enough to hear. The doctor's voice was professional but not cold. It had that tone of someone who needed to tell difficult truths every day, but never got used to it. Sir, I understand your situation, but without the complete medication, my team is doing everything humanly possible with what we have. The problem is that her condition requires something more specific, something that isn't covered by standard emergency care, she said, and each word was like a hammer blow. William leaned against the wall, his heart beating hard. She's explaining that the child will die, he thought, and had to close his eyes for a moment. He heard the homeless man's voice, broken, desperate, begging in a way no human being should ever have to beg. Doctor, I brought everything I could get. Everything, I have nothing more. She's my granddaughter. She's everything. Her parents died. I promised to take care of her. I promised, he was saying, and then his voice disappeared into sobs so violent they made William open his eyes again. He saw through the half-open door, just a glimpse, but it was enough. He saw a small bed, saw a tiny form covered with sheets, saw tubes and wires, saw the homeless man kneeling beside the bed, holding a hand so small it looked like a doll's. William quickly looked away, feeling tears burning his own eyes. Don't look, he told himself, but it was too late. The doctor left the room, and this time William saw her clearly. She was shorter than she had appeared from a distance, with wrinkles around her eyes that came from years of furrowing her brow with concern. She stood at the door for a moment, looking inside, and William saw something that surprised him. She had tears in her eyes too. Professionals, doctors, nurses, they saw death and disease every day, but they still cried. They still cared. The nurse who had brought the homeless man approached, and they talked in whispers. William moved closer, pressing himself against the wall, trying to hear. How much time does she have? The nurse asked, and her voice trembled slightly. The doctor shook her head, and William saw the resignation on her face. Without the medication? Maybe until the end of the night, maybe less. Depends on how long her body can fight on its own, she answered, and William felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He moved away from the wall, feeling dizzy, until the end of the night. A child, that man's granddaughter, the girl whose parents died in an accident. All this was happening while he was chasing a beggar for a wallet. William looked at his own hands, at his expensive suit, at his imported shoes. He thought about everything he had, all the things he could buy with a single phone call. He thought about the bank account that never decreased, no matter how much he spent. He thought about the empty house that awaited him, the lonely dinners, the nights he stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering what it was all for. And he thought about that man there, kneeling beside a bed, holding the hand of a child who was going to die because he didn't have enough money. This isn't right, William thought, and the injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. The doctor began to go back into the room but stopped at the door, turning to the nurse one last time. William held his breath, waiting, knowing that something important would be said. Inform the grandfather about the situation. Be gentle but be clear. He needs to prepare himself, the doctor said, and then went in, partially closing the door behind her. The nurse stood there for a long moment, her shoulders curved under the weight of what she needed to do. Then she took a deep breath, straightened her back and entered the room. William moved to where he could see through the crack in the door, and what he saw destroyed him. The beggar was kneeling, his forehead resting on the edge of the bed, holding that small hand as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. "Don't leave me alone again, please, you're all I have," he whispered, and William had to cover his mouth to keep from making noise. The nurse approached slowly, placing her hand on the old man's shoulder. She crouched beside him, and William saw her speak softly, probably repeating what the doctor had said. The beggar raised his face, and William saw an expression he would never forget. It was the expression of someone who was watching his world end in real time. Eyes wide open, mouth open in a silent scream, tears flowing uncontrollably. He shook his head, denying, refusing to accept. No, there has to be a way. I can get more money. I will, he said. But even he knew they were empty words. He was a beggar. He had nothing. He had already given everything. How are you going to get more money? William thought, and the obvious answer made him feel even worse. The doctor returned to the beggar, and this time she knelt too, placing herself at the same level as him. William saw in that gesture a deep respect, a humanity he rarely saw in the world he lived in. She waited for the old man to look at her, and then spoke, clearly and directly, but without cruelty. "Sir, I need to be honest with you. If we can't get the medication in the next few hours, we can't guarantee anything. We're doing everything within our power, but this specific medicine, it's crucial. Without it, her body won't be able to fight." "I'm sorry," she said, and each word fell like a stone. The beggar looked at her for a long moment, processing, trying to understand, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. "She's going to die," William thought, translating what the doctor had said more gently. And that's when it happened. The beggar collapsed. Not gradually, but all at once, like an imploding building. He fell forward, his hand still holding the money he had brought, that money that wasn't enough, that money he had stolen from a stranger on the street in an act of pure desperation. The bills fell to the floor, scattering around him, and he looked at them as if they were useless, as if they were nothing. His hands were shaking so violently now that he could barely keep them together, and he pressed them against his chest again, groaning in pain. The nurse and doctor moved quickly, holding him, trying to make him breathe, and William heard the doctor speaking firmly. "Sir, you're having a cardiac episode. You need to calm down. You need to breathe," she was saying, but the beggar couldn't. He was breaking physically and emotionally, and William was seeing it all. He's dying too, William thought, and the horror of that realization paralyzed him. William couldn't move. His feet were glued to the cold floor of the corridor, his eyes fixed on that scene unfolding before him, like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. The doctor and nurse were holding the beggar by the arms, trying to make him breathe, and he heard the old man's groans of pain mixed with sobs that came from somewhere so deep they seemed to tear pieces from his soul. The banknotes were scattered across the floor, some stained with tears, and William looked at them, recognizing his own money there, useless, insufficient, unable to save a life. He thought about how many times he had spent that amount on things that meant nothing, on expensive dinners he ate alone, on clothes he wore once and forgot in the closet. And now that money in the hands of a desperate beggar wasn't enough to save a child. This can't be happening, William thought, but it was. The doctor managed to stabilize the beggar enough to make him sit on the floor, leaning against the wall, and she checked his pulse with experienced fingers while speaking firmly but gently. "You need to calm down. Your heart can't handle this. If you collapse now, you won't be able to be here for her when she wakes up," she said. And there was a tired wisdom in those words, as if she knew exactly what to say to bring someone back from the edge. The beggar nodded weakly, his hands still trembling, still pressing his chest, but his breathing was beginning to regulate. The nurse collected the money from the floor carefully, as if they were fragile petals, and placed them in the old man's hand. He looked at the notes as if he didn't recognize them, as if they were pieces of a puzzle he could no longer put together. "It's not enough," he whispered, and those 3 words contained a universe of despair. William stepped forward. He didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. His body had decided before his mind could process, and suddenly he was walking toward that group on the floor, his shoes making a soft sound against the linoleum that seemed too loud in the tense silence of that ward. The nurse saw him first, raising her eyes with a questioning expression, probably wondering who this man in an expensive suit was doing walking through the intensive care unit. The doctor noticed him next, frowning slightly, and William saw the exact moment when she was going to ask who he was, what he was doing there. But it was the beggar who spoke first. The old man raised his face, and his eyes met William's. For a moment there was no recognition, only confusion. Then memory returned like lightning. "You," said the beggar, and the word came out like a breath of terror. The old man tried to stand up, his hands slipping on the wall, his knees trembling under the effort. The nurse held him, trying to make him stay still, but he fought against her with a strength he shouldn't have. He extended the hand holding the money toward William, and then the other hand, the one that still had the brown leather wallet. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, and his voice was hoarse, destroyed by crying and effort. "I'm sorry, I swear I've never done this before in my life. I'm not a thief, I'm not." The words came out stumbling, desperate, as he tried to push the wallet and money to William. The doctor looked between the two men, beginning to understand that there was a story there, and William saw her hand move instinctively to the phone attached to her waist. "He's going to call security," the beggar thought out loud, and the panic on his face was palpable. But William didn't move to take the wallet. He just stood there still, looking at that man who had robbed him less than an hour ago, and who was now offering everything back with hands that trembled so much they could barely hold on. He looked at the thin face, at the wrinkles too deep, at the eyes red from crying, at the way he held his chest even now, even in the midst of all that humiliation. William looked at the half-open door behind the beggar, to where he knew a child was lying, fighting to breathe, waiting for medication that wouldn't arrive in time. And he looked at his own hands, empty, useless, that had never held anything really important. He stole from me to save her, William thought, and for the first time the anger he expected to feel simply wasn't there. "But she will die," the beggar continued, the words coming out interspersed with sobs he tried to suppress. "She is all I have since I lost my son and daughter-in-law. They died, both of them. And she was left with just me, and I promised to take care of her. I promised." He pushed the wallet and money closer to William, as if offering them back could undo what he had done, could buy forgiveness, could change something. "Please, sir, call the police if you want, arrest me, do whatever you want with me, but please, please let me stay with her until, and he couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say out loud what everyone there knew was going to happen. William felt something crack in his chest, a fissure opening in walls he had built so long ago that he didn't even remember why anymore. He's asking to stay with her while she dies, thought William, and had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw that the doctor had stood up and was looking at him with an expression that mixed expectation and judgment. She was waiting to see what he would do. If he would scream, if he would demand justice, if he would make that man pay for what he had done. The nurse was also looking, her hand still on the homeless man's shoulder, protective, as if she had already chosen a side. And the homeless man was now looking at the floor, too ashamed to maintain eye contact, waiting for the condemnation he thought he deserved. William took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his own voice surprised him. It was calm. It was gentle. It was human. "How much is missing?" he asked, and the two words fell in the corridor like stones in water, creating waves he couldn't predict. The homeless man raised his head so quickly that William heard his neck crack. Pure confusion was stamped on his face, as if William had spoken in another language. "What?" he whispered, and there was fear in that question, fear of having misunderstood, fear of hearing what he wanted to hear. William took another step forward, standing just a meter away, and repeated more slowly this time, making sure each word was clear. "How much money is missing? For the medication. How much is missing?" The doctor and nurse exchanged glances, and William saw hope lighting up in the eyes of both, that dangerous hope that healthcare professionals learn not to feel but never completely suppress. The homeless man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, trying to form words that wouldn't come. I don't understand," he finally said, and new tears began to run down his face. The doctor approached William, studying his face as if trying to see inside his soul. "Are you offering help?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush. And William could hear the careful incredulity in her voice, as if she had seen too many empty promises. William nodded, and then, realizing he needed to be clearer, spoke. "Yes. I want to know how much the medication costs, how much is needed to complete the amount." The doctor looked at the nurse, who quickly checked something on a clipboard she was holding, her fingers sliding over papers with efficiency born of practice. She said a number, not very high but high enough to be completely out of reach for a homeless person, and William just nodded. "I'll pay," he said, and the words came out so naturally that for a moment he didn't recognize his own voice. The silence that followed was total. Even the hospital sounds seemed to diminish, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The homeless man looked at William with an expression that went beyond confusion, beyond hope, reaching something close to reverent terror. "Why?" he asked, and the question was so raw, so stripped of any pretense, that William didn't have a prepared answer. Why was he doing this? Why was he offering money to a man who had robbed him? Why did he care about a child he had never seen? He looked at the door of the room behind the homeless man, where he knew that little girl was, and thought of his brother in the small coffin, of the chance he never had. "Because I can," William finally answered, and it was the simplest and most complicated truth he had ever told. The doctor didn't waste time. She turned to the nurse and began to give quick instructions, talking about pharmacy, about arranging the medication, about preparing the application. The nurse left almost running, her steps echoing down the corridor, and suddenly it was just William, the homeless man, and the doctor there. The old man was still holding the wallet and money, but now his hands didn't know what to do with them. He looked at William as if he were seeing a ghost or an angel, or something his mind couldn't categorize. "I don't know what to say," the homeless man whispered, and his voice was so low that William almost didn't hear. William took another step forward and extended his hand, not in a threatening way, but gently. "May I have my wallet back?" he asked, and there was something almost like humor in his tone, as if he were trying to ease the tension. The homeless man looked at the wallet in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. He extended it with both hands, as if offering something sacred, and William took it carefully. The leather was warm from contact, stained with sweat and dirt, and William felt a strange pang as he held it again. It was just a wallet. It was just leather and papers, but somehow it had become the center of something much greater. He opened it, quickly checked the contents, and took out his credit card. The beggar watched every movement as if he were witnessing a miracle unfold. And when William tucked the wallet back into the inner pocket of his jacket, he saw the relief on the old man's face, mixed with shame so deep it was painful to watch. "Thank you," the beggar said, and then repeated louder, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," as if the word could express everything he felt. The doctor returned, bringing a clipboard with forms, and William signed where she indicated, filled in information, provided card details. Everything seemed to happen very quickly and very slowly at the same time, as if time had lost its normal rhythm. He heard the doctor explaining details about the treatment, about deadlines, about procedures, but his attention was divided. Half of him was there signing papers, doing what needed to be done. The other half was observing the beggar, who had managed to stand up and was now leaning against the wall, one hand on his chest, tears still silently streaming down his face. There was something in the way he looked at William, something that went beyond gratitude, something deeper and more disturbing. "He's looking at me as if he knew me," William thought, and a shiver ran down his spine. "Done," the doctor said, taking back the clipboard and the card. "I'll process this immediately. The nurse is already arranging for the medication with the hospital pharmacy. As soon as it arrives, we'll begin the application." She looked at the beggar, and her professional face softened for a moment. "Your granddaughter will receive the treatment. She has a chance now." The old man crumbled again, but this time it wasn't from despair. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his hands covering his face, and William heard sobs of relief so intense that it made his own chest tighten. The doctor briefly placed her hand on William's shoulder, a silent gesture of acknowledgement, and then left, leaving the two men alone in the corridor. William stood there motionless, not knowing what to do or say, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on him. He was about to turn around, about to leave all that behind and return to his empty but familiar life, when he felt something grab his hand. He looked down and saw the beggar's fingers, dirty and calloused, holding his wrist with surprising strength. The old man had stood up again, using the wall as support, and was now standing, looking directly into William's face. There was something in his eyes that wasn't there before, something like recognition mixed with disbelief. "Wait," the beggar said, his voice trembling, and William stopped, turning completely to face him. The old man wouldn't let go of his hand, and his eyes scanned William's face as if reading a map. "Your eyes," he whispered, and then his voice grew louder, more urgent. "That voice. How old are you?" The question was so unexpected, so out of context, that William blinked, confused. "What?" he asked, trying to gently free his hand, but the beggar held firm. "How old are you?" he repeated, and there was something close to panic in his voice now, as if the answer was the most important thing in the world. William frowned, still not understanding, but answered. 42, he said, and watched the color drain from the beggar's face. The old man stepped back, staggering, his hand finally releasing William to go to his chest again. His lips moved, making silent calculations, and his eyes widened more and more. "My God," he whispered, and there was horror in his voice now, pure and absolute horror. "It can't be." William felt his own heart accelerate, a feeling of premonition prickling his skin. "What can't be?" he asked, taking a step toward the beggar, who was now practically leaning completely against the wall. The old man looked at him as if he were seeing a ghost, as if the past had materialized right in front of him, in flesh and blood. 42 years, the beggar repeated, more to himself than to William. "That means 30 years ago he would have been 12 years old." William felt the ground move beneath his feet. 30 years. 12 years. Those numbers meant something important, something his mind was refusing to process. "What are you talking about?" he asked, and his voice came out louder than he intended. The beggar raised a trembling hand and pointed at William, his finger unsteady but determined. "I know those eyes. I know that voice. I worked for a family a long time ago. I was their driver. I took care of the children." Each word fell like a bomb, and William felt his blood freeze. They had 2 sons, 2 boys. One was 12 years old, the other was younger, 7. The world stopped, completely. William couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at that thin, wrinkled face and really see for the first time something familiar there. "There was an accident," the beggar continued, and his voice was breaking now. "I was driving. I couldn't stop in time, the younger boy. He died." William stepped back, then again, feeling as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Memories came like an avalanche. A car, an impact, screams, a funeral, a driver he never saw again after that day. "No," he said, but the word came out without force. The beggar had tears running down again, but these were different. They were tears of recognition, of renewed guilt, of a past that had come back to haunt him. "I remember the older boy at the funeral," he said, his voice broken. "He had these eyes, brown with golden flecks. He stood beside his mother the whole time without crying, and I couldn't look at him. I couldn't, because I had killed his brother." William felt his own tears starting, burning his eyes, and he shook his head, refusing, denying, but knowing it was true. "You," William finally managed to say, and the word came out as an accusation, as a question, as a plea, all at the same time. "You were the driver. You were there. You killed my brother." The beggar collapsed completely, falling to his knees on the hallway floor, his hands covering his face, sobbing in a way that went beyond anything William had heard before. I know, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Every day of my life I carry this, every day." William moved away, his back hitting the opposite wall, and he slid down to sit, mirroring the beggar's position. They stayed there, 2 men destroyed by a shared past, separated by just a few meters of hallway but connected by a tragedy from 30 years ago. "I saved the granddaughter of the man who killed my brother," thought William. And the irony was so cruel, so impossible, that he began to laugh, a humorless laugh that quickly turned into crying. The silence that settled in the hallway was dense, heavy, loaded with 30 years of unspoken pain. William was sitting on the floor, his back against the cold wall, knees bent, hands covering his face. Across the hallway, the beggar was in the same position, mirroring him as if they were two halves of the same tragedy. The sound of their irregular breathing was the only thing that broke the silence, occasionally mixed with muffled sobs that neither could completely contain. William felt as if the world had turned upside down. Half an hour ago, he was chasing a thief. Now he was sitting on a hospital floor next to the man who had killed his brother, the man whose granddaughter he had just saved. The irony was so cruel it made his head spin. How did this happen? He thought, but there was no answer that made sense. Finally, it was the beggar who broke the silence. His voice came out hoarse, destroyed, carrying the weight of decades of guilt. After the accident, they fired me the same day. Your father, he looked at me as if I was a monster, he said, and each word seemed to cost him physically. William didn't raise his face from his hands, but he listened to every word as if they were blades cutting open old scars. I tried to explain that it was an accident, that the other car came out of nowhere, that I tried to swerve, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The boy was dead, and I was driving. The beggar coughed, a dry, painful cough, and William heard the sound of fabric being rubbed, probably the man wiping tears with his dirty sleeve. I lost my job, lost the house they gave me, lost my references. Nobody wanted to hire the man who killed a child, he continued, and there was a bitter acceptance in his voice, as if he were reciting a sentence he knew by heart. William finally lowered his hands, looking at the beggar across the hallway. He saw the profile of that thin face, the wrinkles that seemed like furrows dug by years of suffering. The shoulders curved under the weight of a guilt that had never gone away. My wife left me 6 months later. She couldn't bear to see me like this, so broken, so useless, the beggar said. And now he was looking at his own hands, turning them as if he didn't recognize them. I tried to start over, tried other jobs, but the story always followed me. Always someone knew, always someone told. And then I started drinking because it was the only way not to think, not to see that boy every time I closed my eyes. He stopped, breathing with difficulty, and William saw his hand go to his chest again. Lost everything. Apartment, dignity, health, ended up on the streets 15 years ago. And every day I wake up and I still see that accident. I still see the impact. I still hear the screams, he said, and his voice completely broke at the end. William felt something moving inside him, something that wasn't exactly forgiveness, but also wasn't pure anger anymore. It was understanding. It was the recognition that both of them had been destroyed that day, each in his own way. He wiped his own face, feeling the wet tears on his hands, and when he spoke, his voice came out firmer than he expected. My mother never recovered. She spent the first 2 years in his room, sitting on the bed, holding his clothes. My father tried to get her out, but she would scream, saying that if she left, her brother wouldn't know where to find her when he came back. The words were coming now, after 30 years of being held back, gushing like water from a broken dam. She was hospitalized 3 times, deep depression. She tried to kill herself twice. And every time I visited her in the hospital, she looked at me as if I were a ghost, as if I had died too and she was only seeing my shadow. William had to stop, his throat closing up, and he swallowed hard before continuing. My father buried himself in work. He would leave early in the morning and come back late at night. When he was home, he would drink in silence in the living room, looking at old photographs. He never spoke about the accident again. Never spoke about you. Never spoke about anything that mattered, really. William looked up at the ceiling, at the fluorescent lights that hummed softly, and felt the weight of all those memories pressing on his chest. They divorced when I was 16. My mother moved to another city, trying to escape the memories. My father died of cirrhosis 5 years later, alone. I found him in his apartment 3 days later. No one had noticed he had died. He paused, wiping his eyes again, and when he looked back at the homeless man, he saw that the man was openly crying now, without trying to hide it. I grew up alone. I learned not to feel. I learned to work, to make money, to buy things. But I also learned that none of that fills the void. Nothing replaces having a family. Nothing replaces having someone who cares, William said, and the naked truth of those words was too painful. The homeless man raised his face and his eyes were red, swollen, but there was something beyond guilt there now. There was mutual recognition of two lives destroyed by the same tragedy. "I ruined your life," he said, not as a question, but as a statement, as a final confession. "I took your brother. I destroyed your family. I made you grow up alone, without love, without anything. And now, after all that, after I robbed you on the street like a common criminal, you saved my granddaughter. You saved the only good thing I have left in this world." He shook his head, as if he couldn't process the impossibility of it all. "Why?" he asked. And the question was so raw, so desperate, so genuine, that William didn't have a prepared answer. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find words that made sense, but there were none. Why had he done that? Why had he saved the granddaughter of the man who had destroyed his life? William looked at his own hands, at the expensive suit that was wrinkled and sweaty, at the shoes that had dirt marks from running through the streets. He thought about his empty house, his lonely dinners, all the nights he woke up in the middle of the night feeling like he was suffocating. He thought about the emptiness he had carried for 30 years, the hatred he had fed without even realizing it, how he had become so much like his father without even noticing. And he thought about that moment in the hallway when he had seen the homeless man kneeling beside the bed holding that child's hand, and had seen something he himself had never had. Pure love, unconditional love, love that was willing to steal, to run, to die if necessary. "I don't know," William finally answered, and it was the most honest truth he could give. He stood up slowly, using the wall for support, and felt his legs trembling under his weight. The homeless man watched him with those eyes that had seen too much, suffered too much, carried too much guilt. William wiped his face one last time, trying to regain some composure, but it was useless. He was shattered. He was exposed. He was more vulnerable than he had ever been in his adult life. "I need to get out of here," he said, more to himself than to the homeless man, and began walking toward the hallway, toward the double doors, toward the exit. His steps were uncertain, as if he had forgotten how to walk, and he had to lean against the wall occasionally to keep from falling. Behind him, he heard the homeless man's voice, weak but clear. "Thank you for everything. I don't deserve it, but thank you," he said. And William didn't answer because he couldn't form words. He just kept walking, passing through the double doors, leaving the intensive care unit. The hospital lobby seemed busier now, or maybe William was just more aware of everything. He saw families waiting, saw children crying, saw elderly people sleeping in uncomfortable chairs. He saw life and death mixed in that liminal space, and felt as if he himself was between the two. He walked faster, crossing the lobby without looking at anyone, exiting through the revolving doors into the night that had fallen while he was inside. The cold air hit his face like a slap, and he breathed deeply, filling his lungs, trying to clear his mind. But it didn't work. Nothing worked. He looked at the dark sky, at the stars that could barely shine through the city's light pollution, and felt as if he were floating, disconnected from everything. "What did I just do?" he thought, and had no answer. William walked aimlessly for several blocks, not caring where he was going, not thinking about calling a car or getting a taxi. He just walked, his legs moving mechanically, while his mind tried to process everything that had happened. He had saved the granddaughter of the man who had killed his brother. He had confronted the past he had spent 30 years avoiding. He had cried for the first time since the funeral. He had felt for the first time in decades. And he didn't know what to do with any of these things. The streets were relatively empty for a weekday, and William found himself in areas of the city he never visited, places where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. He saw a young couple walking hand in hand, laughing at something he couldn't hear. He saw a mother carrying a baby singing softly. He saw an old man sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs. Normal life. Life he never had. I wasted it all, William thought, and the realization was overwhelming. He didn't know how long he walked. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, he found himself in a small park, with empty benches and trees that swayed gently with the wind. William sat on one of the benches, letting his head fall back, looking at the tree canopies against the dark sky. His phone had vibrated several times in his pocket, probably work messages from people wanting things from him, but he ignored it. For once in his life, Work didn't matter. Money didn't matter. None of that mattered. He thought about the homeless man, now probably beside his granddaughter, watching her receive the medication that would save her. He thought about the relief the man must be feeling, mixed with the renewed guilt of meeting again the boy whose brother he had killed. He thought about the impossible complexity of it all, about the way fate or coincidence or whatever it was had placed them both in the same place at the same moment. I should be angry, William thought, but the anger wasn't there. The days that followed were strange, disjointed, as if William were living in a dream he couldn't wake up from. He went to work, sat in meetings, signed papers, but none of it seemed real. His mind was constantly back in that hospital corridor, to that thin and broken face, to those words he couldn't unhear. He caught himself thinking about the girl, wondering if she was recovering, if the medication was working. He thought about the homeless man, about that weak heart he had seen fail in real time, and felt a concern he didn't understand. At night, alone in his huge and empty house, he lay awake looking at the ceiling, reliving memories he had buried decades ago. He remembered his brother, his smile, the way he laughed too loudly and ran too fast. He remembered his mother before the accident, when she still smiled. He remembered his father when he was still present. I lost everything that day too, William thought, and for the first time allowed himself to feel the pain of it completely. It was on the morning of the fourth day that William woke up and knew he needed to go back. He didn't know why, couldn't rationalize it, but he knew he needed to see how the girl was doing. He needed to close that circle somehow. He dressed in more casual clothes this time, jeans and a simple shirt, and drove to the hospital as the sun was rising. The lobby was calmer at that hour, with fewer people, and William walked directly to the reception. The same nurse from days ago was there, and she recognized him immediately, her face lighting up with a smile. "You came back," she said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "How's the girl?" William asked, getting straight to the point, and saw the nurse's smile grow even bigger. "She's recovering wonderfully. The medication worked. She's in the regular pediatric ward now. She doesn't need intensive care anymore. She's even smiling, talking. It's a miracle," she said, and William felt something loosening in his chest. "And the grandfather?" he asked, and saw the nurse's expression change. The smile diminished, replaced by concern. "You don't know?" she asked, and William felt his stomach sink. "Know what?" he asked, his voice coming out louder than intended. The nurse exchanged glances with another who was nearby, and then sighed. "He's hospitalized, in the cardiac emergency ward. His heart, after the stress of everything that happened, couldn't handle it. He had a severe crisis on the night you were here. We managed to stabilize him, but he needs urgent surgery," she explained, and each word was like a hammer blow to William's chest. He leaned on the counter, feeling dizzy. "Is he dying?" William asked, and the nurse hesitated before answering. "Without the surgery, yes. He has maybe a day, maybe less. The problem is that it's an expensive, complicated surgery. Even public health care has its limits without the proper procedures, and there's no time for that," she said softly. William didn't need to ask anything else. He knew what that meant. The homeless man was going to die because he couldn't pay for the surgery, just as his granddaughter had almost died. The irony was brutal. "Where is he?" William asked, and the nurse pointed to a different corridor, giving instructions on how to reach the cardiac ward. William thanked her and began to walk, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. His mind was a jumble of thoughts and emotions that he couldn't organize. That man had killed his brother. That man had destroyed his family. That man was the reason for 30 years of pain and loneliness. But that man was also dying. And for some reason that William couldn't fully understand, it mattered. "Why do I care?" he thought, but he already knew the answer. Because seeing someone love that much, sacrifice that much, had awakened something in him that had been dead for a long time. He arrived at the cardiac ward and asked for information at the desk. A different nurse, older with tired but kind eyes, checked the computer and then looked at William with curiosity. "Are you family?" she asked, and William hesitated. He wasn't, but he was no longer a stranger either. "Yes," he lied, and saw the nurse accept it without question. "He's stable at the moment, but needs surgery in the next few hours. Without it, his heart will completely fail. The doctor is trying to expedite the processes, but without advance payment, there are limits to what we can do quickly, she explained, and there was frustration in her voice. Frustration of someone who knew the limitations of a system that couldn't always save everyone. William nodded, processing, and then asked the question he knew he needed to ask. How much does the surgery cost? The nurse said the number, and it was high, very high, but not impossible. Not for William. He looked at his hands, thinking of everything he had bought in his life, of all the useless things he had accumulated, and none of them seemed important now. I can pay, he said, and saw the nurse's eyes widen. Are you sure? She asked, as if she needed to confirm she had heard correctly. William nodded, already taking out his card. Do the surgery. I'll cover all the costs. The nurse looked at him for a long moment, and then her professional face softened into a smile of gratitude. I'll call the doctor in charge immediately, she said, already picking up the phone. William filled out forms, signed papers, provided information, all mechanically without thinking much. But in his mind, a battle was happening. He was about to save the life of the man who had killed his brother, the man who had destroyed his family, the man who was the reason for all his pain. And he didn't know if he was doing the right thing. He thought of his mother, how she would react if she knew. He thought of his father, how he would have felt. He thought of his brother, what it was like to watch that small coffin being lowered while the driver watched from a distance. The anger was there, still alive after all these years, pulsing in his chest. But there was something else too. There was tiredness. There was the exhaustion of carrying hatred for so long. There was the understanding that that man had suffered too in his own way. There was the memory of that trembling hand, holding a little child's hand, willing to do anything, even steal, to save her. I don't know if this is forgiveness, William thought, but I can't let him die. The same doctor from days ago appeared, the woman with grey hair and deep circles under her eyes, and she recognized him immediately. You came back, she said, and there was something like respect in her voice. I heard what happened to him. I'm authorizing the surgery. Pay whatever is necessary, William said directly without beating around the bush. The doctor studied him for a moment, her penetrating eyes as if trying to read his soul. You know he might not survive, right? His heart is very weak. The surgery is risky, but without it there's no chance at all, she explained, and William nodded. I know. Do it anyway. The doctor briefly placed her hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of acknowledgement, and then turned to begin preparations. He's in room 207. You can see him before surgery if you wish, she said before leaving, and William stood there deciding. Did he want to see the beggar? Did he want to look into the eyes of the man who haunted his nightmares and say what exactly? That he forgave him? That he didn't forgive him but was saving him anyway? That he was doing this for the girl and not for him? William had no answers. But his feet began to move, taking him down the hallway, passing numbered rooms until he reached 207. The door was slightly ajar, and William pushed it gently, entering the small room. The beggar was lying in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors that beeped softly. His face was even paler than before, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. He seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, as if he were slowly dissolving. William stood at the door just watching, and felt that impossible mixture of anger and compassion battling inside him. You ruined my life, he thought, but the thought didn't have the strength it used to have. William took a few steps into the room, approaching the bed. The monitors showed numbers he didn't fully understand, but he knew they weren't good. The beggar's heart was failing. That was obvious even to a layman. He looked at that wrinkled face, at those calloused hands resting on the white sheet, and tried to feel the hatred he thought he should feel. But he couldn't. All he felt was tiredness, tired of carrying so much pain, tired of living an empty life, tired of being alone. I authorized your surgery, William said in a low voice, not knowing if the beggar could hear him. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I want you to live, or if it's just because I can't let someone else die. But I did. He paused, looking at the monitors, at that line that rose and fell, showing the heart that was about to give up. Your granddaughter is fine. She's recovering. She'll live. And I need you to live too, because she needs you, William continued, and the words came easier now. That's when it happened. The main monitor emitted a sharp, shrill sound that cut through the air like a siren. The line that had risen and fallen in a regular rhythm suddenly became erratic, jumping wildly, and then began to flatten. William saw the numbers change, saw alerts flashing on the screen, and didn't need to be a doctor to understand. Cardiac arrest. He was paralyzed for a second, watching the beggar's body contract once on the bed, and then the door burst open. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, pushing an emergency cart, shouting instructions to each other. A nurse grabbed William's arm, pulling him. "Sir, you need to leave, now," she said firmly, and William allowed himself to be pushed out of the room. The door closed in front of him, but he could see through the small window, could see the medical team working on the beggar's body, could see the hands pressing on the chest, could see the equipment being prepared. William stood there, leaning against the wall outside the room, watching everything through that small window. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking. His breathing was irregular. And his mind was screaming a single question. What did he want to happen? Did he want the beggar to live? Did he want him to die? And suddenly, with a clarity that surprised him, William knew the answer. He wanted the man to live. Not for the man himself, but for the girl who would lose the only relative she had. For the chance to break the cycle of pain that had begun 30 years ago. For the possibility that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all of this. "Don't die," William whispered. His forehead pressed against the cold wall, his eyes closed. "Please don't die now. Not when I finally decided to save you." Time in the waiting room dragged on in a way that William had never experienced before. Each minute seemed to last an hour, each hour an eternity. He was sitting in a hard plastic chair, elbows resting on his knees, hands interlaced, staring at the floor without really seeing it. Around him, other people were waiting too, each carrying their own anxieties, their own fears. A woman was crying silently in the corner, being comforted by someone who seemed to be her daughter. An older man walked back and forth, his hands in his pockets, his face marked by worry. And William just waited, feeling as if he were suspended between two worlds, between two possibilities, between life and death, of a man he didn't know if he wanted to live or die. "But I do," he thought suddenly, with a clarity that surprised him. "I do want him to live." It was 4 hours, 4 hours of surgery that felt like 40. William didn't move from his chair except once to go to the bathroom and twice to get water. He didn't check his phone, didn't think about work, didn't think about anything beyond that operating room and what was happening in there. He tried to imagine what was being done, the doctors working, the heart being repaired, life being maintained by threads. But his mind couldn't form clear images, only vague feelings of urgency and hope. That's when he saw the grey-haired doctor coming out through the double doors, still in surgical clothes, a mask hanging from her neck. William stood up so quickly that he became dizzy, and he had to hold onto the chair for a moment. The doctor saw him and walked towards him, and William tried to read her face, but she was too good at maintaining a neutral expression. "He survived," she said as soon as she got close enough, and William felt his legs almost give way. "The surgery was more complicated than we expected. His heart was in worse condition than the tests showed, but we managed. He's stable now, in recovery. He'll need time, a lot of time, and constant care. But he will live," the doctor continued, and there was tired satisfaction in her voice, the satisfaction of someone who had fought against death and won. William couldn't speak for a moment. He just nodded, feeling tears burning his eyes, and had to turn his face to wipe them quickly. "You saved his life. Twice, actually. First the granddaughter, now him. I don't know what the story is between you, but I know you're a good man," the doctor said, briefly placing her hand on William's shoulder before walking away. William stood there absorbing those words and wondered if she would still think that if she knew the truth. "A good man," he repeated mentally, and the idea was so strange, so new, that he didn't know what to do with it. The weeks that followed were surreal. William returned to the hospital every day, sometimes twice a day. He checked on the beggar's progress with the nurses, talked with the doctor about prognoses, but never entered the room. He would stand outside looking through the window, watching that man slowly regain color, slowly begin to move. They never talked, never exchanged words. William didn't know what to say and suspected the beggar didn't either. But he came. Every day. As if it were a silent promise he needed to keep. He also visited the girl who had been transferred to the regular pediatric ward. She was in a colorful room full of drawings on the walls and toys scattered about. William would stand at the door watching her play, listening to her laugh, and that sound was like music. She didn't know who he was, didn't know that he had saved her life, and somehow that made everything purer. It was on a clear autumn morning, 6 weeks after the surgery, that William received the call. It was the head nurse, the one he had met on the first day. "They're being discharged," she said, and there was genuine joy in her voice. "The girl has been ready for days, and the doctor finally cleared the grandfather too. They're going home today." William held the phone tighter, feeling something moving in his chest. Home. But the beggar had no home. He lived on the streets. And the girl, where would she go? "Wait," William said quickly. "Don't let them leave yet. I need to sort some things out first." He hung up before the nurse could respond and stood there, in the middle of his empty office, surrounded by expensive furniture and windows that gave onto a view he never really looked at, and made a decision. He picked up the phone again and started making calls. 3 hours later, William was driving back to the hospital with papers on the passenger seat. Papers that changed everything. He had spent the last few weeks not just visiting the hospital, but doing research, making calls, arranging things. He had found a small but decent apartment in a safe neighborhood with 2 bedrooms near a good school. He had paid 6 months' rent in advance. He had arranged for basic furniture, appliances, clothes, and he had found a job for the beggar. Nothing extravagant, but honest, in an organization that helped homeless people reintegrate into society. The man would work there, helping others, using his own experience to make a difference. William didn't know if the beggar would accept. He didn't know if he had the right to offer, but he needed to try. They deserve a chance, he thought, and accelerated a bit more. When he arrived at the hospital, he went straight to the room where he knew he would find both of them. The door was open, and he stopped at the threshold, observing the scene inside. The beggar was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing clean clothes that the hospital had provided, still thin, still fragile, but alive. And beside him, holding his hand, was the girl. William saw her clearly for the first time. She was small for 7 years old, with dark hair tied in braids, large and curious eyes, and a smile that illuminated the entire room. She was talking animatedly to her grandfather, telling him something about a drawing she had made, and the beggar was listening with an expression of such pure love that it made William's heart tighten. This is the child who almost died, William thought, and could hardly believe seeing her so full of life now. The beggar looked up and saw William standing at the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other, and William saw recognition, gratitude, guilt, and something more in the man's eyes. The girl followed her grandfather's gaze and saw William too. "Who is he, Grandpa?" she asked with that unfiltered curiosity of children, and the beggar hesitated before answering. "He is. He's the man who saved you, and who saved me too," he said softly, and the girl looked at William with those big eyes, studying him. Then, to William's surprise, she jumped off the bed and ran to him, stopping right in front, looking up. "Thank you," she said simply, and then, without warning, hugged his legs. William froze for a second, not knowing what to do, and then slowly, hesitantly placed his hand on her head. "You're welcome," he managed to say, and his voice came out hoarser than he expected. The girl went back to her grandfather, and William entered the room, closing the door behind him. He stood there, holding the papers, not knowing how to begin. The beggar observed him with that guarded expression, waiting, clearly prepared for anything. I came to bring this," William finally said, extending the papers. The beggar took them with hands that still trembled slightly and began to read. William saw his eyes widen, saw the confusion, saw the disbelief. This is a rental contract," the beggar said, looking up. "For us?" William nodded. "And information about a job, if you want. You don't have to accept." But I thought you would need a place to go. A fresh start." The silence that followed was heavy, and William saw tears beginning to run down the beggar's face again. "Why?" the beggar asked. And it was the same question from weeks ago, but this time William had an answer. Because you love her, and she needs you. And because I've spent 30 years letting the past destroy me, and I don't want to do that anymore. He stopped, taking a deep breath, and then continued. I don't know if this is forgiveness, I still don't know, but I know I don't want to carry anger anymore. I'm tired. And if I can do something to help you have a better life, a dignified life, then I will. The beggar covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs, and the girl cuddled against him, clearly not understanding everything but feeling the emotion. William waited, giving the man the time he needed, and when the beggar finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red but determined. I accept, and I will work hard. I will be worthy of this. I promise, he said, and William nodded, feeling that weight he had carried for so long becoming a little lighter. It was the girl who suggested it. They were preparing to leave the hospital, collecting the few things they had when she tugged on William's sleeve. Can you come with us? She asked, and William looked at the beggar, who seemed surprised but not against the idea. Where to? William asked, and the girl smiled. Grandpa said we need to go to an important place before going to the new house, a place to say thanks, to say goodbye. The beggar confirmed with a nod, and William understood without having to ask. The cemetery, the grave, his brother. Yes, William heard himself saying, I'll go with you. They went in William's car, a quiet and comfortable sedan that was completely different from anything the beggar or the girl had ever experienced. The girl was fascinated with everything, touching the buttons, asking questions, and her innocence brought a lightness to the moment that otherwise would have been too heavy. The beggar sat quietly in the passenger seat, looking out the window, and William could feel the tension emanating from him. They drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the city for the suburbs where the cemetery sat on a hill overlooking everything. William hadn't been here in years, not since his father's funeral. He had avoided it, had run away, had refused to face it. But now as he passed through the iron gates, he felt it was time. He parked, and they got out, walking across the well-kept lawn, passing rows of headstones and monuments. The girl held her grandfather's hand, looking around with that innocent curiosity of children who don't yet fully understand death. William guided them, following a path that his body remembered, even if his mind tried to forget. And then he stopped. There it was, a simple grey granite headstone with a name, 2 dates that were too close together, and a phrase his mother had chosen, "Forever in our hearts." William stood there looking at those words he hadn't seen in years, and felt 30 years of pain crashing down on him all at once. His legs trembled, and he had to breathe deeply several times to keep from falling. The beggar approached slowly, reading the name on the headstone, and William saw the exact moment when reality hit. He saw the man turn pale, saw his legs give way, and then the beggar was on his knees on the damp grass, his hands touching the stone with a broken reverence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and then louder, "I'm so sorry." Sobs shook his body, and he bent over the headstone as if he could embrace it. "I never meant to, it was an accident. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. And he died. And I carry this every day of my life." William stood there watching this, and felt his own tears starting. He thought of all the times he had imagined this moment, all the times he had dreamed of confronting this man at his brother's grave, of making him pay, of making him suffer. But now that it was happening, all he felt was sadness, sadness for all of them. Slowly, William knelt down too, not far from the beggar, both of them there on the grass before that headstone. He placed his hand on the cold stone, feeling the engraved letters beneath his fingers. "I spent 30 years being angry," William began, his voice low but firm. "Angry at you, angry at the world, angry at God, angry at everything and everyone. I let that anger consume me, transform me into someone empty, someone alone. I built walls so high around me that no one could get in and I couldn't get out." He paused, wiping his eyes, and looked at the beggar, who was listening with that total attention. "But today I understand something I didn't understand before. You also lost everything that day. Your life ended too. And carrying anger toward you didn't bring my brother back. It didn't heal my family. It didn't make me happy. It just made me lost." The beggar raised his face, and his eyes met William's through the tears. "I never expected forgiveness. Never thought I deserved it. And I'm not asking for it now. I just want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about him, that I don't wish I could go back and change everything," he said, and his voice was just a broken whisper. William nodded, understanding, and looked again at the headstone. "My brother had a pure heart. He was kind, generous, quick to forgive. He would have been happy to know that you saved a child, that you loved your granddaughter so much you would do anything for her. He would have seen the good in that." William touched the stone again, imagining the boy who had been, the man who would never be. "And I think he would want me to try to do the same, to try to see the good, to try to live again instead of just existing." They stayed there for a long time, two men kneeling before a grave, crying for things lost and for chances they never had. The girl, who had kept a respectful distance, finally approached, putting a small hand on her grandfather's shoulder. "Grandpa, don't cry," she said softly, and then looked at William. "You don't need to cry either. Grandpa told me about the boy who's here. He said it was a very sad accident, but that the boy is now in heaven watching over all of us." William looked at that child, that life that was almost lost, and saw in her something he had forgotten existed. Hope, innocence, the belief that things could get better. And then, for the first time in 30 years, William smiled. It wasn't a big or dramatic smile. It was small, hesitant, as if his muscles had forgotten how to form that expression. But it was genuine. It was real. It was a smile that came from a place inside him he thought was dead. "Thank you," he said to the girl, and she smiled back in that carefree way that only children can. The beggar also saw the smile, and something in his expression changed. There was still guilt there always would be, but there was also something new, something like fragile peace. They rose slowly, brushing grass from their pants, wiping their eyes. William placed his hand on the gravestone one last time. "Goodbye, little brother," he whispered. And this time it wasn't with pain, but with love, with happy memory of who he had been, not with anger for all that would never be. They began walking back to the car, the beggar leaning slightly on William, still weak from surgery, and the girl skipping ahead, already back in her childish world where sadness didn't last long. It was when they were reaching the cemetery gate that she suddenly stopped. "Wait, I forgot," she said, and ran back. William and the beggar stopped, watching her run to where they had been, pick something up from the ground and come running back with that radiant smile. It was a folded paper, a bit crumpled. "I made this at the hospital," she said, extending it to William. "It's for you." William took the paper, unfolding it carefully, and what he saw made his heart stop for a moment. It was a drawing made with crayons, the way children draw, with vibrant colors and figures, a bit disproportionate but full of life. In the center, there were 3 people holding hands. One was clearly the girl, with her characteristic braids. Another was the beggar, a bit hunched but smiling. And the third was a tall man in a suit whom William recognized as himself. They were under a bright blue sky with a large yellow sun in the corner. But what made William hold the paper more tightly was what was in the background, a small figure drawn with lighter, almost ethereal lines. It was a boy, floating among white clouds, with angel wings and a smile. He was looking down at the 3 on earth, with open arms as if embracing them from afar. William looked at the girl, confused and moved. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to the angelic figure, although he already knew the answer. The girl looked at the drawing, then at her grandfather, then back at William. "It's the boy from the cemetery. Grandpa told me about him. He said he was your brother, and that he was very kind, and that now he's in heaven taking care of everyone." She smiled again, that pure and weightless smile. "Grandpa said he's always near us protecting, and that we don't need to be afraid because he watches over us from up there." William couldn't speak. He just looked at that drawing, at that small figure with wings, at that childish representation of something he had spent 30 years trying to forget. But it wasn't painful to see. It was comforting. Somehow, through the eyes of a child who had never known him, his brother was there, present, protecting, loving. William carefully folded the paper and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice breaking. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." The girl seemed satisfied with that and went back to skipping ahead, humming a tune only she knew. The beggar approached William, walking slowly by his side. "She asked about you, after she woke up when she found out you had paid for her medication and for my surgery. She wanted to know who was the good man who had saved us," he said softly so the girl wouldn't hear. "I told her. Not everything, she's too young to understand it all. But I told her about the accident, about the boy we lost, about how I had done something very bad without meaning to, and how you, even so, saved us. She understood in her own way, the way children understand, and she made that drawing for you." The beggar stopped walking for a moment, turning to face William. "You gave me my life back, you gave her back to me. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of that. Not for you, but for him," he said, nodding his head toward the cemetery, toward that tomb they were leaving behind. William looked at the beggar, really looked, perhaps for the first time without the filter of anger and pain. He saw a man who had suffered as much as he had, just in a different way. A man who had lost everything and yet had found enough love to raise a granddaughter, to steal her back from death, to keep trying. "We both lost a lot that day," William finally said. "And we both spent 30 years paying for something that was an accident. But now neither of us needs to lose anything more. Now we can try to live again. Really, this time." The beggar nodded, wiping away more tears that wouldn't stop falling, and then extended his hand. William looked at that calloused hand, marked by years on the street, and didn't hesitate. He took it, squeezing firmly, and in that handshake was a silent promise of a new beginning, of trying, of life. They reached the car, and William opened the doors. The girl entered the back seat excitedly, already chattering about the new house they were going to see, about how she would decorate her room, about the school the good man had told her about. The homeless man entered more slowly, still moving carefully because of the surgery, and William gently closed the door before walking around to the driver's side. He paused for a moment before getting in, looking back at the cemetery on the hill, at that place that held so many memories. And for the first time, he felt no weight when looking there. He felt peace. He felt as if he had finally left something behind, not forgetting, never forgetting, but letting go, allowing himself to move forward. He got in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he saw the reflection of the girl, smiling and playing with some small toy she had in her pocket. He saw the homeless man looking out the window with that expression of someone who was seeing the world with new eyes. And he saw himself, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't just see the empty rich man he had become. He saw someone who had done something important, someone who had saved lives, someone who had chosen to forgive, or at least try. "Maybe my brother really is watching over us," William thought, lightly touching the pocket where the drawing was kept, and for the first time believed it. As they drove back to the city, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The girl had fallen asleep in the back seat, tired from the emotional day, even without fully understanding its weight. The homeless man was looking out the window, and William could see his reflection in the glass, could see the silent tears still falling, but that were now different. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of second chance. "Where to now?" the homeless man asked quietly, and the question had more than one meaning. William thought for a moment and then smiled again, that small but genuine smile. "Forward," he answered simply, and gently accelerated, taking that makeshift family toward a future none of them had imagined would be possible. The first days in the new apartment were strange for everyone. The homeless man, whom William discovered was named Raymond, during one of their conversations at the hospital, walked around the rooms as if afraid to touch anything, as if everything would disappear if he blinked. The girl, whose name was Emma, didn't have these reservations. She ran from one room to another, opening cabinets, testing light switches, jumping on the new bed with laughter that filled the empty space with life. William had gone with them on the first day, helping to carry the few things they had managed to gather, and had stayed watching as they explored the space that was now theirs. Raymond had stopped at the door of Emma's room, looking at the bed with colorful sheets, at the small desk, at the empty shelves waiting to be filled with toys and books. "I never could give this to her before," he had said, his voice breaking. "A real room, a real bed." William had placed his hand on his shoulder, not knowing what to say, but the gesture seemed enough. The initial weeks were of adjustments. Raymond started working at the organization that helped homeless people, and William saw the transformation happening slowly. The man who had been bent and broken was gradually straightening up, regaining dignity with each day of honest work. Emma was enrolled in a good public school in the neighborhood, and William would never forget the day he took her to buy school supplies. She had been amazed at the options, touching notebooks and colored pencils as if they were treasures, and in the end chose a pink backpack with stars that she carried out of the store as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you, sir," she had said, hugging the backpack, and William had felt that tightness in his chest that was becoming familiar. "You don't need to call me sir," he had answered, and she had looked at him with those big, curious eyes. "Then what should I call you?" she had asked, and William hadn't known how to answer. It was on a Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after the move, that everything changed. William had fallen into the habit of visiting them regularly, bringing things he thought they might need, checking if everything was okay, although he himself didn't completely understand why he cared so much. On that specific day, he arrived with a pizza box because Raymond had casually mentioned that Emma loved it, but they rarely had extra money for luxuries like that. When the doorbell rang, it was Emma who opened the door, already in her pajamas, even though it was only 6 in the evening, her hair still damp from the shower. "You came?" she shouted excitedly, and then saw the box. "Pizza!" Grandpa Uncle brought pizza. William stood frozen at the door, the word echoing in his mind. Uncle. She had called him Uncle. Raymond appeared at the door, drying his hands on a dish towel, and must have seen something in William's face, because he stopped. "Emma, love, you can't just call him that without asking if he wants to," Raymond had said gently, but Emma had just looked confused. "But he's like an uncle," she had said with that simple logic of children. "He takes care of us, brings things, takes me to buy supplies, has dinner with us sometimes. That's what uncles do." William had looked at that 7-year-old girl, who had summarized in a few words something that had taken him months to understand. He had become part of their lives, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he wanted to. Because for the first time in decades he had something that resembled a family. "Uncle is fine," he had finally said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended, and the smile Emma gave could have lit up the entire city. She had pulled him inside, already chattering about her day at school, about a new friend she had made, about a drawing her teacher had praised. And William had sat at the small table in that modest apartment, eating pizza on plastic plates, listening to children's stories, and felt something he never expected to feel again: belonging. The following months established a routine that none of them had planned, but that they all naturally accepted. William had dinner with them at least twice a week, sometimes bringing food, sometimes arriving to discover that Raymond had cooked something simple but made with care. He helped Emma with her homework when she asked, discovering that he was surprisingly good at 3rd grade math. He took Raymond to the doctor for the regular checkups that his delicate heart required, and sat in the waiting room as a family member would. They didn't talk much about the past. It was like a silent agreement between William and Raymond, a wound that was healing but shouldn't be poked too often. But sometimes late at night, when Emma was already asleep and the two of them were having coffee in the small living room, there were conversations. Raymond talked about what it was like to be working again, about the satisfaction of helping people who were where he had been. William talked about work, but also, for the first time in his life, about personal things, about what it was like to grow up without a sibling, about loneliness, about how he had forgotten what it was like to have someone waiting for him. It was during one of these night conversations that the idea was born. William was talking about an article he had read about the growing number of homeless people in the city, about how existing shelters were overcrowded, about how resources were lacking to really help people rebuild lives instead of just surviving. Raymond had listened attentively and then commented on his own experience, about how what had been most lacking wasn't food or temporary shelter, but opportunity. Opportunity to start over without being judged, without everyone knowing his story, with dignity preserved. Someone should do something about this, William had said, and Raymond had given a sad smile. People who can usually don't want to, and people who want to usually can't. William had been quiet for a long moment, looking at his coffee cup, and then raised his eyes. What if someone could and wanted to? He had asked, and saw the understanding slowly emerging on Raymond's face. In the days that followed, the idea took shape. William began doing research, consulting experts, understanding what really worked in terms of social reintegration. He discovered that there were successful models in other cities, places that not only offered shelter, but also professional training, psychological support, help finding employment, and permanent housing. Places that treated homeless people not as problems to be managed, but as human beings with potential to be recovered. And the more he researched, the more the idea grew. He could do this. He had resources. He had money sitting in accounts, investments that generated more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. And for the first time, he had a purpose for all of it. It wasn't about accumulating more. It was about using what he had to make a real difference. "I'm going to do this," he had announced to Raymond at one of those dinners, and Raymond had looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "This will cost a lot," Raymond had said, always practical. "A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy." William nodded, having already considered all this. "I know, but I have all of this. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want to use it for." He paused, looking at Emma, who was drawing on the living room floor, completely oblivious to the adults' conversation. "When my brother died, I thought I had lost the chance to be part of something good, to have a family, to make a difference. But you two, you showed me that there's still time, that I can honor his memory by doing something that matters." Raymond quickly wiped his eyes, turning his face away, but William saw the tears anyway. "What are you going to call this place?" Raymond asked after composing himself, and William smiled. He already knew. He had always known since the idea was born. "I'll name it after him, after my brother, so he continues to live somehow, helping people." The following months were a mixture of bureaucracy, planning, and hard work. William bought an old building in a part of the city that was being revitalized, a place large enough to accommodate everything he imagined, but not so isolated that people would be ashamed to go there. He hired architects to renovate while maintaining the dignity of the space, without making it look like a cold institutional shelter. He hired social workers, psychologists, coordinators for professional training programs. And he asked Raymond to be part of the team. "You know this reality from the inside," William explained. "You know what these people need because you were one of them. Your role would be to be a counselor, someone they can look at and see that it's possible to get out of this situation." Raymond accepted, emotional, and William saw the man gain another layer of purpose. Emma had been proud when her grandfather told her about the special new job, and she had made a drawing of Uncle's Center that William had carefully saved. The inauguration was set for a Saturday spring morning, 6 months after that initial conversation. William had woken up earlier than necessary, anxiety and excitement mixed in his stomach. He had dressed carefully, choosing a suit but not his most formal one, wanting to look professional yet approachable. When he arrived at the building, there was already a small crowd. Staff he had hired, representatives from the city hall, people from partner organizations, and in front of everyone, Raymond and Emma. She was wearing a new dress, blue with white flowers, her hair in perfect braids that William knew Raymond had spent the morning making. Raymond wore simple but clean and well-kept clothes, and William saw how different he was from the man he had chased through the streets months ago. He was standing upright. His eyes had life. He was smiling. "Uncle!" Emma had run to William as soon as she saw him, and he had picked her up without thinking, something he had done a few times in recent weeks and which always surprised him by its naturalness. "The place looks beautiful. Grandpa showed me yesterday and there's a garden and everything." William laughed, hugging her before putting her back on the ground. Raymond had approached, and the two men looked at each other for a long moment. They didn't need to speak. Everything that needed to be said was in that look. Gratitude, respect, friendship that had been born from the ashes of a tragedy. Raymond had extended his hand, and William had shaken it firmly. "Thank you," Raymond had simply said, "for everything." William had shaken his head. "Thank you for giving me a reason to do this." And then it was time to begin. The ceremony was simple but moving. William had made a short speech, explaining the vision of the center, talking about the importance of giving dignity and opportunities. But the most important part had been when he revealed the name. A curtain had fallen from the building's facade, revealing large engraved letters, Gabriel Social Reintegration Center, his brother's name. William had to stop for a moment, emotion closing his throat, but he continued. My brother died very young, in an accident that changed many lives, but he was the kind of person who always saw the best in others, who believed everyone deserved a second chance. And it is in his honor that this place exists, to give second chances, to help people rebuild their lives. There had been applause, and William saw Raymond crying openly, not caring who saw. Emma had held her grandfather's hand, not fully understanding the magnitude of the moment, but feeling it was important. After the official ceremony, there was a tour of the building. William had shown the dormitories, simple but dignified, each with comfortable beds and individual lockers. He had shown the training rooms where people could learn new skills. The offices where social workers would work with each individual to create personalized reintegration plans. The community kitchen where dignified meals would be served. And the garden in the back, a green space where people could simply be, breathe, remember they were still part of the world. It was in the garden that Emma had found other children, children of some of the staff who had come, and within minutes she was playing, her laughter echoing through the space. William had been watching from a distance, Raymond by his side, and had felt that peace that was becoming increasingly familiar. She's happy, Raymond had commented, watching his granddaughter run after a ball with other children. For the first time since her parents died, she's truly happy. She has a home, a good school, health, and, he paused, looking at William, she has a family larger than just me. William hadn't known what to say to that. Raymond continued, his voice low. I know we started in the worst possible way. I stole from you. I brought back terrible memories. I made you relive the worst thing that ever happened in your life. He had taken a deep breath. But somehow from all of that, this emerged. The three of us emerged. This place that will help hundreds of people emerged. Some kind of healing for all of us emerged. William had looked at the building, at the name engraved on the facade, at the children playing, at Raymond by his side, who was no longer the desperate homeless man, but a recovered man. My brother would believe in this, William had finally said. He would believe that good things can come from tragedies, that people can change, that forgiveness is possible. In the days following the inauguration, the center began to officially operate. The first people arrived, brought by other partner organizations, referred by city social workers. William made a point of being there during the first days, not to supervise, but to understand, to see the real impact of what he had created. He saw Raymond working, talking to people who arrived dirty, broken, hopeless, and saw how the words of someone who had been there made a difference. I know how it is, Raymond would say. I was where you are, and look where I am now. It's possible. You just need to accept help and take one step at a time. William saw tears, saw resistance breaking down, saw hope beginning to sprout in eyes that had forgotten how to feel it. There was a woman about William's age who had arrived on one of the first days. She was clean, but her clothes were old, and there was a shame in how she held her purse, as if she was trying to make herself smaller. William was in the garden when he saw her enter, being welcomed by one of the social workers. He had heard fragments of the conversation. The woman had lost her job. She couldn't pay the rent. She had stayed with friends for a while but couldn't impose. She had been sleeping in her car for 2 weeks. She had 2 children who were temporarily with a sister because she had no way to care for them. Her voice had broken while telling this, that shame of being a mother and not being able to provide. William had felt as if he were hearing 1,000 similar stories, each one an individual tragedy, each one a life that deserved dignity. The social worker had explained the programs, the possibilities, and William had seen hope fighting against disbelief on the woman's face. Really? She had asked. Can I really stay here and get help to find a new job, to have a home again? And when the social worker confirmed, the woman had broken down in tears of relief. William had seen dozens of such stories in the first weeks. An elderly man who had lost everything when his pension hadn't arrived due to a bureaucratic error, and who had been on the street for 3 months waiting for a resolution. A young man who had left the foster care system upon turning 18 with nowhere to go or how to support himself. An entire family, parents and 3 small children, who had lost their home in a fire and had no insurance or resources to start over. Each story was unique, but they all shared something. They were normal people who had fallen through the cracks of a system that hadn't caught them in time. And now, in that place that bore his brother's name, they had a chance. William felt as if he was seeing the purpose of all his wealth finally making sense. It wasn't about having more, it was about doing more with what he had. Weeks turned into months, and the center established itself as a vital part of the community. Success stories arrived regularly. The woman who had cried on the first day had secured a job in an office and rented a small apartment, reuniting with her children. The young man from the foster system was taking a technical course sponsored by the center and already had a contract promise upon completion. The family from the fire was in a new home, furnished with donations and with the children back in school. And there was Raymond, working every day, being living proof that starting over was possible. William watched him interacting with people, always with patience, always with empathy that only someone who had lived through it could have. And he saw the effect it had. People trusted Raymond in a way they didn't trust other team members, not because the others weren't good, but because Raymond understood in a visceral way. Emma had also become part of the center's life in an unexpected way. She came after school some days, waiting for her grandfather to finish work, and naturally gravitated to the garden where there were often children. Children of people going through the program, who came with their parents or stayed there while they were in interviews or counseling sessions. Emma played with them without distinction, without judging, just being a child. William watched her sometimes, seeing how she shared toys he had bought for her, how she consoled a smaller girl who was crying with the same tenderness her grandfather used with adults. She inherited his heart, William had commented once to Raymond, and the man had looked at his granddaughter with such pride that William felt envy and joy simultaneously. It was on a particularly quiet afternoon, about 5 months after the inauguration, that William had a revelation. He was sitting on a bench in the garden, reviewing some funding papers, when he realized he was smiling, for no specific reason. Just smiling because he was there, in that place he had created, surrounded by people who were rebuilding lives, hearing the laughter of playing children, knowing that Raymond was inside helping someone. And he realized that he didn't feel alone. For the first time since he was a 12-year-old boy standing at a funeral, he didn't feel alone. He had purpose. He had people who cared about him. He had Emma calling him uncle and running to hug him when he arrived. He had Raymond, who had gone from thief to friend, from guilty to partner in doing good. He had this indefinable thing he had been looking for his whole life without knowing. Family, not by blood, not in the traditional way, but family nonetheless. Emma had appeared running at that moment, interrupting his thoughts, her face red from playing. "Uncle, uncle, look what I made," she had said, showing a crumpled drawing. It was the 3 of them again, as it always was in her drawings, but this time there were more people. Many people, adults and children, all holding hands around the center building. And in the sky, as always, that small figure with wings watching from above. "It's all of us," Emma had explained unnecessarily. "All the people Uncle helps and Grandpa and me and Gabriel up there, taking care of everyone." William had taken the drawing, feeling that familiar emotion rising, and pulled Emma into a hug. "It's perfect," he had said, and it was true. It was the perfect representation of what that place, what that unlikely journey had become. When Raymond had finished work that day and came to pick up Emma, he had found William still on the bench, the drawing in his hand, looking at the sky that was beginning to take on shades of pink and orange with the sunset. Raymond had sat beside him in silence, and they stayed that way for several minutes, just existing together in that space they had created. "Are you okay?" Raymond had finally asked, and William had chuckled softly. "I'm more than okay. I'm happy." The word sounded strange in his mouth, like a forgotten language he was relearning. "For the first time in 30 years, I'm truly happy." Raymond had placed his hand on his shoulder, that simple gesture that had become common between them. "He would be proud," Raymond had said softly, and William had immediately known who he was talking about. His brother, the 7-year-old boy who had never grown up, who had never known what would come after his death, but who somehow, through an impossible chain of events, had been the catalyst for all of this. "I think so," William had agreed, looking at the name engraved on the facade, now illuminated by the external lights that automatically turned on at dusk. "I think he would be happy knowing that something good came from that terrible day. That lives are being saved in his name." Emma had joined them, tired of playing, and settled between them on the bench, her head leaning against William's arm. "Can we go home?" she had asked, yawning, and William had realized that she had said home in the singular, as if it were one place for all of them, even though technically each had their own address. But she was right in a way. Home was no longer just an address for William. It was where these people were. It was that center. It was the dinners in Raymond's modest apartment. It was any place where he felt that belonging. They walked together to the parking lot, Emma in the middle holding both their hands, swinging her arms with that infinite energy of children. William said goodbye to them in the car, promising to have dinner together on the weekend, and stood watching as they left. Then he returned to his own car, but didn't immediately get in. He stood there looking back at the building, at that place he had built on foundations of pain and forgiveness. He thought about how his life had changed in less than a year, how he had gone from chasing a thief out of anger to creating a help center out of love, how he had gone from living alone in an empty house to having a 7-year-old girl calling him uncle, how he had gone from carrying hatred for 30 years to finding peace in forgiving the unforgivable. William took out his phone and opened the photo gallery. There was the photo he had taken at the inauguration, of him, Raymond, and Emma in front of the building, beneath the name Gabriel. They were smiling, all three of them, and there was something in the photo that perfectly captured what they had become, an unlikely family, a family born from tragedy and transformed by conscious choices to try to be better. He saved the photo as his wallpaper, and for the first time his phone displayed real faces instead of some generic landscape image. It showed his family. "Thank you, little brother," William whispered to the dark, star-dotted sky. "Thank you for still looking after me, even after everything. Thank you for bringing me here." And though no answer came, he felt, in some deep and inexplicable way, that he had been heard. He got into the car and drove home, but for the first time the house didn't feel so empty. Because he knew that tomorrow he would return to the center. He would see Raymond working. He would see Emma playing. He would see people rebuilding lives. And he would know that he had found his purpose, not in accumulating more wealth, not in building a corporate empire, but in using what he had to make a real difference. In honoring the memory of a boy who died too young by creating opportunities for others to live better. In transforming the deepest pain of his life into a source of healing for hundreds of others. This is legacy, William thought as he pulled into his home's garage. This is what it really means to live. That night, before sleeping, William did something he hadn't done since childhood. He prayed. Not a formal or memorized prayer, but just an honest conversation with whoever might be listening. He gave thanks for the second chance life had given him. Thanked Raymond for stealing his wallet, because from that desperate act all this transformation had been born. Thanked Emma for being alive and healthy, bringing light to everyone around her. Thanked the center that was helping so many people. And thanked his brother for having existed, for having been the kind of person who inspired goodness, even 3 decades after his death. "I found peace," William whispered in the darkness of the room. "Finally, after all these years, I found peace. I found a family. I found a purpose, and I promise to honor this every day I have left." The last thought before sleeping was of the image Emma had drawn. All of them together, connected, with Gabriel watching from above. And for the first time in 30 years, William slept through the night without waking. Without nightmares, without that emptiness that used to consume him in the silent hours of the early morning. He slept in peace, knowing he had made peace with his past, had built a meaningful present and had a future where he was no longer alone, where he belonged, where he was loved, where he made a difference. And that, he finally understood, was all he had ever needed. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't material success, it was human connection, it was love. It was family, it was purpose, it was forgiving and being forgiven. It was transforming pain into healing, it was simply being truly alive. The next morning, William woke to the sound of the phone. It was Emma, her excited voice echoing through the device. "Uncle, are you coming to have lunch with us today?" "Grandpa's going to make that pasta you like," she said, and William smiled before he even fully opened his eyes. "Of course I will," he answered, and heard her shout of joy on the other end of the line. After hanging up, he lay there for a few more minutes, looking at the ceiling, but this time not with that feeling of weight he had carried for so long. He looked with lightness, with gratitude. He got up, prepared coffee, and as he drank, looking out the window at the awakening city, he thought about how strange it was that life's biggest changes came from the most unexpected places, from a theft, from a hospital, from a desperate homeless man and a sick child, from a wallet he had pursued in anger and now couldn't even remember where he had stored. None of it was in his plans. None of it made sense when he thought rationally. But it made perfect sense when he felt it. "Life has its own plans," William murmured, taking another sip of coffee. He picked up his phone again and looked at the wallpaper, that photo of the three of them at the inauguration. And next to it, in favorite contacts, were only two names now, Raymond and Emma, his family. Not the one he was born with, but the one he had chosen, the one he had built, the one he had saved, and that, in a way, had saved him too. William smiled again, that smile that was becoming more and more natural, less and less strange on his face. He had a lunch to go to. He had a girl waiting for him. He had a man who had once been his enemy and was now his friend. He had a center to visit. He had lives to touch. He had purpose to live for. He finally had a reason to wake up every day. And this time, unlike every morning for the past 30 years, he was looking forward to living this day and the next, and all those that would come after. If William, Raymond, and Emma's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on the screen, made especially for you. See you soon.